readers, our next book of the day is Sittin', How Four Friends Stood Up by Sitting Down, written by Andrea Davis Pickney and illustrated by Brian Pickney. And one thing I do want to remind you about, readers, is that when you read the back, often if we're not reading the blurb, but we see comments that are written by famous publishing companies or authors or illustrators, but there's one that I noticed right down here that gives a clue toward if this is a fiction or nonfiction. This book was an award winner in 2011 when it won an award for one of the best nonfiction books of the year. So always remember, look through these comments and awards that authors and illustrators earn. It gives you a lot of clue into their purpose of why they want us to read the story and why they wrote it. So our book of the day is Sittin', How Four Friends Stood Up by Sitting Down. We must meet hate with love. These were Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words that got them started. Four hungry friends, eager to eat, each took a seat at the Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezel sat quiet and still, with hearts full of hope, with Dr. King's words strong and close. They were college students with a plan, and it was February 1st, 1960. And notice these have quotes, and so these are Dr. Martin Luther King's words. Another important text feature of evidence of that this is a nonfiction book is when we see quotes that are words spoken by the real people. They didn't need menus. Their order was simple: a donut and coffee with cream on the side. Woolworths was busy, so the friends waited, patiently, silently, without a fuss. They were the only black kids at the counter. David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezel sat while everyone else got served. At first, they were treated like the hole in a donut, invisible. Others tried to ignore them. The waitress watched and refused them. This was a sign of the times. Whites only. This was the law's recipe for segregation. Its instructions were easy to follow. Do not combine white people with black people. Segregation was a bitter mix. Now it was the friends' turn to ignore and refuse. They ignored the law and refused to leave until they were served. Those kids had a recipe too. A new brew called integration. It was just as simple. Combine black and white to make sweet justice. For them, integration was better than any chef's special. Integration was finer than homemade cake. Integration was a recipe that would take time. So, David, Joseph, and Franklin and Ezel sat quiet and still, with Dr. King's words strong and close. be loving enough to absorb evil. They sat straight and proud and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. After sitting and waiting and wanting, a police officer came, but the four friends wouldn't leave. And notice, readers, how are they protesting? Talk about that. What's their style? What's their purpose? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are they doing anything wrong? What is their sitting in representing? The police officer didn't know what to do. The students were doing nothing wrong. No crime in sitting, no harm in being quiet, no danger in looking hungry. So the officer left the lunch counter without doing anything. The Woolworths man turned off the lights. He announced, "Woolworths is closed." So the customers left, including the four friends, who went home to dinner where they were served first. News had already spread about the sit-in. David, Joseph, Franklin, and Ezel got their names in the paper. The next day, February 2nd, 1960, more students showed up at the lunch counter, sitting still for what was right. No reservations needed at Woolworths. The students seated themselves. They were dressed in their best clothes. They were polite and determined. No guesswork for the waitress. The young people knew the menu by heart. They ordered. No food came. So they sat in silence and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. The waitress reminded them, whites only. But those kids wouldn't budge. They didn't move. Until they were served, they refused. All they wanted was some food, a donut and coffee with cream on the side. To pass the time, the students read their school books. They wrote in their journals. They finished their homework. They didn't need to read the menu, so they studied for tomorrow's test. What had started in Greensboro spread faster than a grease fire. There were lunch counter protests now in Hampton, Virginia, Nashville, Tennessee, Montgomery, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia, and many other southern towns. If lunch counters could go from whites only to all welcome, if segregation could turn to integration, if black people and white people could break bread together, everyone would pass the test. So, talk about, what do you think the author means by if they could break bread together? Everybody would score high, A plus, with that coffee and cream on the side. But many folks were not motivated to make their grade. As the sit-ins grew, angry people gave the students a big dose of hatred, served up hot and heaping, coffee poured down their backs, milkshakes flung in their faces, pepper thrown in their eyes, ketchup not on the fries, but dumped on their heads. They yelled at the students, "We don't serve your kind. Go home. Goodbye." The students really wanted to lash out, but couldn't. They wanted to strike back, but didn't. Sitting still was so hard. Talk about that, readers. What, what, how would you feel? Would that be hard for you? How do you think you'd respond? Could you have their focus and discipline and heart? Practicing peace while others showed hatred was tougher than any school test. What words of wisdom. Think about that. Have you had a moment in your life where you had to practice peace while others were showing hatred? And was that tough? Tougher than a test? Now, there were news cameras filming the sit-ins and viewers at home watching it all on TV. The students were more determined than ever to show the world the true meaning of peace. So they sat in silence, with hearts full of hope. With Dr. King's dream true and close, these were the words that kept them going. We must meet violence with non-violence. You can see it on TV. What are they representing? What's their sit-in? What's their style? What's their belief? The students sat proud and still and waited and wanted a donut and coffee with cream on the side. Soon, the sit-ins grew bigger and wider. White students joined their black friends to protest the unfair treatment by restaurant owners who would not serve food to black patrons. They also opposed segregation libraries, buses, parks, and pools. In this sentence right here, think about some of our other books of the day. Are there some text-to-text connections you can think with this sentence? They also oppose segregated libraries, buses, parks, and pools. What's that remind us of other characters and stories we've read about? With so many students gathered, people got scared there would be fighting. They were afraid of all those youngsters grouped together for a cause. Even though the students were committed to peace, the police now took action. They accused the students of loafing. They arrested them. They took them to jail. The students didn't resist. They didn't fight. Instead, they sang freedom songs to keep the peace. They held Dr. King's words steady and close. Demonstrate, show, calm, dignity. And does this part of the story give you a text-to-text connection to yesterday's stories? Talk about that. What's it remind you of? Soon folks were so busy arguing about who was right and who was wrong that they stopped going to Woolworths and other segregated places. Some shops were forced to integrate to keep their businesses alive, but the struggle was far from over. In April, an activist named Ella Baker organized a student leadership conference at Shaw University in North Carolina to help the young demonstrators. With Ella, the students formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC.